my life improved significantly when I stopped caring about what my wife thinks or how happy my wife is.
In this episode, author and creator Nabeel Azeez breaks down the exact steps to escape extended adolescence, defeat relationship resentment, and reclaim your purpose.
Joining live from Dubai, he works directly at the intersection of modern men's issues and traditional faith, building concrete frameworks that unlock genuine male strength and independence.
Women are working now. They don't exactly need men to provide for them. So where do men fit in when the traditional role of the Muslim man has always been to provide for the women in his family 100%? True patience is at the first stroke of calamity. It's a reflection of your character that when bad stuff happens to you, what is your immediate reaction?
Until you admit that you are not good at something, you're going to be living in this diluted version of ego and denial. And I think a lot of men are stuck there.
You're a teenager for 10 years, and then you're a college student for another 4 years, where there's a retardation of progress there.
I think women, they have this idea that if they send their man to therapy, he's going to get fixed. He's going to become this feminist man who she's always wanted and be almost more of a nice guy in many ways. That's just not what it means to be a man.
The men who actually do the work end up being more of a problem to these women because
Hello, welcome back to the Men's Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Marc Azoulay, and I'm here with Nabeel Azeez. He's calling all the way from Dubai. I'm really excited for this conversation because he is, I think, the first blogger and newsletter creator that has kind of combined this idea of modern masculinity and Muslim faith. He's written a book that's out right now. You can see it on Amazon. You can get it. We'll have a link in the description. It's called The 40 Hadith on Masculinity. He also has a version for femininity. But I'm really excited to talk about this because it's really going to be an insight into another culture and how the conversation is happening on the other side of the planet. So Nabeel, welcome to the show.
Mark, thank you for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure. I'm more excited to sort of interrogate you about how you're helping men with therapy. So this is going to be an interesting back and forth.
For sure. Yeah, I think it'll be a great mutual conversation. So I want to start with you a bit of what got you into doing this work and becoming more public and talking about themes of masculinity? You know, like we mentioned before, you're one of the first, if not the first, really content creators that are out there writing about this stuff from the Muslim perspective. So I'm curious about your story and what got you started.
Yeah, so I started doing this over 10 years ago now. So the first Muslim masculinity blog, if you could even call it that, I launched it in 2015. At the time, I mean, it's a little bit juvenile now when I say the name, but it used to be called Becoming the Alpha Muslim. And so now I bought the domain muslimman.com as a little bit more sophisticated. So the reason why I got into it, I mean, you could probably tell from the name of the old website, is I went down this rabbit hole of red pill and modern kind of men's self-improvement and masculinity, and there wasn't anything available at the time for Muslims specifically. And so I decided, hey, why not? Why don't I try and be the guy that writes about this kind of thing? So that's how I got into it. It's been 10 years now, and so as I've gotten older, the writing has matured a little bit, my ideas have matured a little bit, and just my life experience and perspective on the world have changed a little bit. And so that's what led to muslimman.com, and then the two books which I have over here, which they're reflecting on the screen, but so you can't see the titles properly, but those are the two books.
Yeah, the covers are awesome. It's very epic. So I love that imagery you have there. Okay, yeah. So tell me a bit about, I guess, the state of the conversation over there in the Middle East and in Dubai, maybe specifically. And I'm coming in with a little bit of a bias. I work with a number of clients that are actually live in the Middle East, that live in Dubai, and they sought us out because they say there's not a lot of access to mental health services over there. And they're going all the way to the US to get access to therapy. So I'm curious if that's a trend or what are you seeing?
That's really interesting. So I know there are some therapists in the UAE, in Dubai, for example, because we have a Dubai Health Authority, and people who do services like this, they have to get registered before they can treat clients. So we do have some. I'm sure there's way more demand than there is supply, and then especially if there are men looking for male therapists, I'm sure there's even less, like there are even fewer options. So that actually doesn't surprise me a lot. You said you're calling all the way from Canada, is it? Or
Colorado,
Colorado,
yeah,
okay.
US.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
the same as Tim Winnicky.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay, I was
He's a
on
good
his
friend of mine.
podcast. Yeah, I was on his podcast as well. Lovely gentleman. He sounds so gentle when he speaks,
Oh.
and it's just very soothing. He has a career in ASMR if he wanted to.
He does. His voice is made for podcasting. It's unbelievable. He has that like baritone that's just like perfect. He could be
Yeah,
a,
so I mean, to
narrator.
answer your question, yeah, I mean, I don't think there are that many options. It's becoming more and
Yeah.
more popular now. I don't know too much about like the serious kind of therapy, like that's conducted by actual professionals. I know the kind of Instagram pop culture therapy speak is very popular around this region, as like sort of new age concepts perpetuate around the world. So we have a lot of people, posting Instagrams and TikToks about trauma and childhood trauma and all the fancy lingo that you guys use, which admittedly is quite silly sometimes, but that's how it is.
It's very silly. And I think especially like in the Instagram context, right? It's like it's often taken out of context. It's used to like justify like shitty behavior sometimes. It's a whole kind of issue.
Narcissism, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like narcissism overused. Like, yeah, there's so much stuff that is like way overused, I feel like. So tell me a bit about, so you're getting this like injection, right, of like new age concepts, right? Modern mental health, TikTok therapists, whatever. And it's I imagine it's clashing or intersecting at least with Islam, right? Which is like a traditional, ancient religion. So talk about that. Like how is that playing out?
It's a good point that you brought that up. So that is one of the reasons why I started the original blog, because I saw kind of there were these like new kinds of ideas. Feminism is a big one, and like the Muslim world in general is about, I would say, like 10 years behind. 10 years behind the West in terms of like socio-cultural movements, right? So now in the West, like you have the red pill and there's like sort of like an anti-feminist movement, or there has been for a few years now, but that hasn't caught on over here yet, or it's just starting to catch on now, several years behind. And then as the internet has become more popular, there's less of a lag between the culture movement when it starts in the West and it gets over here. So now we have all of these. I don't know if you've watched the Whatever podcast, Fresh and Fit. Have you watched those podcasts?
No, I have not.
So they have these podcasts where it's sort of like it's kind of like a battle of the sexes kind of format, where it's like always men versus women, that kind of thing. And so that's making its way over here. So one of the reasons why I started the original blog was to address these questions and these concepts and concerns from the lens of Islam, or from the lens of a Muslim. Now, I'm not like an expert or like a Muslim theologian or anything like that. I'm just like a layperson, but a sort of well-read layperson, as you will. So I just tried my best, and that's how it turned out eventually. And then that's what eventually led to the books, 40 Hadith on Masculinity and 40 Hadith on Femininity, because I want to just decide, okay, like enough with the gender wars. Can we get to like the final word on masculinity and femininity as it stands in Islam? So tagline is like, we wrote the book on masculinity and we wrote the book on femininity for Muslims in particular.
Yeah. So can you give us some examples, like some examples of, I guess where like the new age stuff has changed the way that, Muslims look at this, or ways that it's kind of clashed up or battered against it? Like, I'm really curious about that interaction and how the culture is shifting or staying the same, right? Maybe it's reacting to it.
Excellent question. So, and you have these sorts of tensions in the West as well. So the idea of gender roles in marriage, for example, and the idea of having relationships outside of marriage is another example. But the biggest example will be gender roles within marriage. So, women are working now, and that's just how the world is right now, and they're making their own money. They don't exactly need men to provide for them per se, because they've got their own jobs and their own income. Where do men fit in there when they're married, when the traditional role of the Muslim man has always been to provide for the women in his family 100%? So how does that work now? And I mean, these are the same discussions and questions that you guys have in the West. And I'm curious to know how it looks on your end of things when you're working with men and when you're helping men. What does that look like with regard to the type of work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So, the way that I kind of coach and advise my guys is that, like, I think roles are important, but they don't have to be tied to gender in the way that they traditionally were. But what I see from a lot of guys, and I live in Colorado, which is like an extremely liberal area, right? And a lot of our clients are also from places like California or New York, so we're far more left leaning. But what that looks like is a lot of guys, especially of my generation, the millennial generation, we came up wanting everything to be 50-50, right? That's what we were taught, is that everything has to be 50-50. You have to divide all the labor. There's no roles. And if you're saying that a woman needs to be cooking or cleaning, you're like a sexist. And that's wild. And I think it doesn't work in practice. If you're trying to live a household, live in a dual household, especially with children, you can't divide everything 50-50. There's going to be a time where someone has to take up more slack and someone has to take up less slack. And I think it's helpful to have different domains, right? So like in my marriage, right? Like I like cooking, so I'm the main cook, but my wife does the cleaning and the laundry, and those are traditionally like feminine roles, but it's because we've talked about them, but I will say for a lot of guys, it's weird for them. Like they feel bad asking their wives to cook dinner for them. It's kind of swung all the way in the other direction. And it leads to a lot of guys exhibiting what we kind of call the nice guy syndrome, which you may be familiar with, of like essentially being a people pleaser, saying yes to everything, not really having boundaries and just trying to do it all, right? Trying to do all the domestic things and all the provider roles. And that leads to a lot of resentment in relationships. And those guys end up taking it out on their wives, right? Or leaving, or, they have a porn addiction, or they have a secret life in some way, like I think it's pretty unsustainable. So that's what I'm seeing there, is like the breakdown of these traditional things have actually created quite a bit of resentment and strife and confusion. Because I think one of the critiques of, the left movements is that they break things down, but they don't often provide a new solution. So you have a lot of guys that are lost. They're like, I don't even know what to do. Like you told me this thing is bad and I believe you, but you never gave me step 2. You never told me like what the better solution is.
What's funny is like, how when Me Too happened a few years ago, and then there was like this huge kind of movement online of like women talking about how they've been harassed, and I'm sure much of that is real and has happened. But then now they're complaining about why won't guys approach us anymore? So like broken it down, but they haven't actually replaced it with anything. And now, like, okay, so the guys got the hint, and the ladies are stuck.
Exactly. And I think what came to its place, and I'm curious about, the red pill movement through your eyes too, because I see that as a very Western movement. So it's interesting to see that it, swept the Middle East as well. Like the red pill movement is there and it's providing a solution, right? It's basically saying like, hey, forget about all the stuff they've taught you. It doesn't work. They're lying to you. And like, here is how you actually need to do. You need to double down on some of these traditional roles. And to be honest, like there is some truth to it. Right? Like I think some of the stuff they talk about of like getting in shape and like getting your finances figured out and building confidence and being more assertive, like all of that is awesome. And I think what guys need to hear, because, the previous generation, again, my generation, we were taught to like really suppress our masculinity in a lot of ways. And now we're coming to it in these like midlife crisis moments where we're like, trying to like get into CrossFit when we're 45 years old and like buying a motorcycle and like, doing all the men's work, which, helps my business. But it's like, I wish we had done it before. I wish we had a healthier message growing up. So we don't have to do it on the back end.
Yeah. So I think in the Islamic world, the way the red pill stuff is taking place is because guys can kind of see, okay, this is where society is going now with globalization, with the internet, with the proliferation of Western media and things like that. That's like the culture of the world now is basically internet culture or American culture as in some way, shape, or form. And so the guys are trying to figure out, okay, how do we sort of navigate this, and how do we manage the relationships that we have with people, whether that's whether that's our mother, whether that's our wives, whether that's our daughters or our sisters, and still do it in a way that is in line with our values and in line with our faith. You talk about the work that you're doing with men and therapy and things like that. Has there been an increase or a growth of men seeking therapy with you, or is because it's always been my assumption that there's just generally a stigma about seeking therapy, particularly with our kinds of cultures, but with men in general, it's even more so.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I think the stigma still exists, but I think it's changed, So I think if you go back in time, I don't know, 20, 30 years, the stigma was more like, okay, psychotherapy is for like crazy people and drug addicts, basically, right? Like you have to have like a real problem to go to psychotherapy. And I think a lot of men, like, one, we don't want to admit we have a real problem because who wants to admit that you're broken and messed up, right? So like we often would avoid it from that case. And, we talked about a lot on the show, like the format of traditional psychotherapy doesn't really work for men, right? Sitting and talking to a guy, making eye contact, talking about your feelings for 50 minutes every week is like really foreign to a lot of men. Like we just did not grow up doing that. It like feels a little gay in a way, right? Like it's a little too intimate. Like we're just like not really built for that, which is why MTO has switched that up quite a bit. But, essentially that was the old stigma. I think the new stigma, to your point that you talked about before, with this influx of TikTok and Instagram therapists and like call out culture, right? Whether that's like, the social justice movements or the Me Too movement or things where you have a lot of angry content creators online, right? Most of them are women, I will say. They are like saying therapy, like men need to go to therapy, right? But they're saying it with like such anger and such force that now it's seen almost as a punishment, So a lot of the guys that come in, they come in because their wives basically mandated that they have to come in. They said, hey, you go to therapy. I saw from this content creator that you need to be fixed. You have to go to therapy or else I'm going to divorce you, right? Or I'm going to take the kids or whatever. So it's used as a threat. So like, I guess if you look at the data, I think more men are going to therapy. Like this, it's more usage, but the stigma is still very real. And I think if like self-help and mental health is seen as a punishment or seen as an ultimatum, one, it's just not going to be that effective. Right. And two, it frames us as like an antagonist from the beginning, right? That we're here to like change you or fix you. So a lot of guys, I think, prefer working with male providers because it's like, hey, at least we share something, at least you're not going to like another person who's just going to lecture you and tell you how much of a narcissist and how abusive you are. Because, and listeners, like, I mean, you've listened to me for a while, this is the case, is like, it's way more complicated than that. It always takes two to tango. We're here to like listen to you and like figure out what you want. And what I see with a lot of the guys that I end up working with is like they come in with divorce being threatened by their partners. They do a lot of self-work. They grow, they heal, they understand their past. They get, healthier habits. And then they end up leaving their wives because their wives don't grow with them. I see that. I mean, I got to say at least 6 or 7 times out of 10. Like that is like way more common now. So all that to say is I think it's still difficult for guys to start therapy, but I have seen that once they do it with someone who they trust, and when they join a men's group, which is I think even more powerful, they end up loving it. They end up being like, oh wow, where has this been my whole life? I really haven't had a collection of people that I can talk to and trust and really go through life with as a brotherhood.
That's so interesting that you said that the men who come to you and do the work, but their wives don't grow with them, end up leaving their own wives. It's like with guys, we always have to, like we start at zero, right? And we have to build ourselves into the person that we end up being. But then with women, it's like you're perfect just the way you are, that's what the message that they keep receiving. And so there's always something wrong with the guy, and then he's got to go to therapy. He's got to do the work, is what they say on TikTok. You need to do the work and do the reading, etc., etc. And then the women in his life are stagnant.
Yes. Well, I think if you're a guy and you're looking at therapy, you really got to be selective. I think a majority of therapists won't do anything. Frankly, they're just like validating you. They're just listening to you. They're just like sitting there nodding, saying yes. And like, you'll change if you want to change, but if you don't want to change, nothing's going to happen. Right. And I think the next segment is guys that are kind of to your point, Nabeel, like that will change you into the person that your wife wants you to be. And the good therapists, which I believe at MTO we have, like, we're going to change you to who you want to be. And if that includes your relationship or not, that's up to you, right? Like you'll see where the cards lie. But I think that's very true. Like, I think women, like, they have this idea and they're sold this idea through social media that if they send their man to therapy, he's going to get fixed. He's going to become more compassionate. He's going to, you know, become this feminist man who she's always wanted and be almost more of a nice guy in many ways, like have no needs, always provide for her, never complain, never get angry, never be aggressive. And like, that's just not what it means to be a man. You know, like that's we're not trying to neuter men out there. But I think a lot of men are afraid of that like they go to therapy to become more of a woman, you know, and we're here to make you more of a man, right? That's the idea.
That's the funny thing is, so the men who actually do the work end up being more of a problem to these women because they like they don't. I mean, they get out of like the quote unquote beta mindset. They stop being simps. They stop putting women on a pedestal, and they start living lives with themselves as the focal point. I know there's another coach I'm friends with where the way he coaches men who are, let's say, unhappy in their relationships or unhappy in their marriages, he basically coaches them to understand that while doing the work, there might be a point where you have to walk away, or you have to be willing to walk away. And so that's part of the transformation, and that willingness to walk away is what gives the man the power and the ability to improve the relationship from his side of things.
If you're willing to leave, then you can then choose to stay. And I think these models, and I'm curious again what it's like in Dubai, right? But like these models of masculinity that my industry talks about, where they see these men as like bullies, or, you know, your alcoholic uncle, or like Donald Trump, right? Like there's this kind of like archetype of these men being these like kind of bully asshole characters. But most men that I see, and I talked about a little bit earlier in the episode, like are nice guys, are very shy, are very meek. You know, they struggle with, you know, executive functioning. They struggle, like, you know, staying in shape. They struggle taking care of themselves. They struggle, you know, being assertive in a job to get promotions, right? Like I think the average guy that comes to therapy is not an asshole. In fact, he needs to be more of an asshole. He needs to, kind of to your point, he needs to be like more assertive. He needs to feel his power more. He needs to do stuff that he thinks is difficult, so he feels like a man. You know, what I see is a lot of guys that are frankly, you know, neutered. Or they're afraid. They're afraid of their wife, right? They're afraid of the world. They're afraid of the government. And it's like living as in fear just creates a very small life. So a lot of our work is helping these guys break free from those to become more of who they are.
I'll tell you something that, you know, might be a little bit embarrassing to Mrs. Aziz, that my life improved significantly when I stopped caring about what my wife thinks or how happy my wife is. So it's like a very strange kind of counterintuitive way to be, where you just don't care. Like, you put yourself first. And oftentimes it makes the wife happier as well, or the girlfriend happier as well. So that's quite interesting. I don't know if there's some kind of clinical concept that backs that on your side.
Yeah, it's like stop being codependent, right? So like the word they use in psychology is codependent, which is basically your emotions are tied to the emotions of another person, which by definition is a powerless position, right? Because you can't control their emotions. So their ups and downs are going to change yours. And what I find with especially, you know, traditionally feminine women, which most are, like they want a man that's inspiring to them. You know, I think most people do. Most people want to be with a partner who they respect, who they think is beautiful, who they're attracted to. And if you become this person who is just like a doormat and you don't have your own personality and you're just like always trying to fix someone's emotions that don't want to be fixed, you know, or can't be fixed, it creates a power dynamic that I think is actually pretty disgusting to a lot of women. I think women want to be led. You know, they don't want to be commanded. And I think that's the line you were talking about, right? They don't want to be commanded, obviously. They don't want to be forced into doing things, but they want to be led and they want to be inspired. And they want to feel that like their partner has shit under control, is taking care of the family, the kids, their job, everything, right? That has stuff on lockdown, and that has a vision for the future. And that lets the woman relax and be more feminine, right? And to your point, be more happy, right? Like be more happy, be more sexual, be more emotional, be more joyous, like not have to hold all the burden of life anymore.
Yeah, it's true. And I was curious, you mentioned that your sort of coaching has gone through some changes on men's therapy online. I was curious to know, like, how is working with men or therapy for men, how does it differ from women seeking therapy? So like, does does the work that you do for men, do you have to change it for like the male kind of cognition, or is there a kind of concept that you could call male cognition and female cognition, and do the different modalities of therapy have to change to fit them?
Short answer, yes. Long answer, I can start digging into it. So kind of a shorthand that I use is, I think women grow through relationship and men grow through challenge. We can unpack that a little bit later. But I think therapy, as it was originally designed, was designed by men for men. If you think of like the original kind of founding fathers, Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, right? It's all male thinkers, and most of their clients were other men, right? Then it started to work. Then it became a female-dominated field, and it switched, and it became more relational. And I think for women that works really well, right? The idea that you're bonding, they'll say in therapy, like, oh, it's the relationship is the thing that's the most important, right? Or you got to build rapport, you got to build trust. And that stuff is important. You got to build safety, right? And for women, if they feel connected to somebody, right, whether that's their therapist or their partner, right, like they will grow. Right? It's this idea that they're being nurtured relationally, they're being nurtured emotionally, and they kind of grow on their own. But for men, we don't really work that way. We grow through challenge. And I think coaching, and MTO has recently pivoted to bring in more coaching, is like setting a challenge. When I think about masculine love, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, I think of like it's setting that proper level of challenge. You don't want to make it too difficult, because if it's too difficult, you just overwhelm the guy and he shuts down, right? And if it's too easy, you're just patronizing him. He's like, yeah, I can do that. Like, you thought I was just like weak. Of course I can do that. So you set that perfect level of challenge, and then you coach him to attain the challenge. And the challenge could be something, physical. Hey, get in shape, work on your diet. Or if, in therapy, it's more emotional. Hey, have this conversation with your wife, figure out how to be a better father, make this career advancement, kick this habit of drinking or porn use that you've had for a long time. We set that challenge, and then we coach you every step of the way. And by overcoming challenges together, that's how we bond, because you look at the other man, you're like, okay, this guy's my ally. This guy's my team member. I can count on this person to help me with difficult things in life. And it kind of goes back to what you say, and I'll pause in a moment, of like going from zero and having to build yourself up. A good therapist, a good coach will help you build yourself up so that you can become that stronger version of yourself.
Well, I don't even know where to go from there. So, okay, where should we move the conversation to next? I'll say one thing that I found is that you mentioned the idea of like setting a challenge, right? I found that like just getting together and doing stuff can also be very, very helpful. So there's like this meme that says like, men will do X instead of going to therapy. I don't know if you've heard that meme. Like it's basically anything, like you insert anything. So men will like get punched in the face instead of going to therapy. I sent a video to Tim a couple of weeks ago where it's this group of guys. They built their own like little village out of like lumber and they just built it from scratch. They like built an entire village out in the middle of the boonies somewhere. And I sent this video to him. I said the email to him. I said, men will build their own village instead of going to therapy. So it's just like that. That's just the activity of like working with your hands and exertion, and then I don't know, things sort of work themselves out. I don't even know if there's some kind of subconscious work that's happening in the background. But yeah, I wonder if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, that goes to that challenge piece that we're talking about, right? Where it's like you will learn if you figure out a challenge that you care about and it's difficult enough, you will learn and grow through that challenge, right? The relationships are secondary. And I think as men, we just have to admit that. It's like we're not as relational as women. We're not even close to as relational as women. Doesn't mean that we don't have friends, right? Doesn't mean that we're not good partners and we're good fathers, but like we are doers. And doing stuff with other men build those relationships, and you get to learn about those guys through that. But it's not so much, again, how women want us to learn about ourselves. We're not talking about like our childhood trauma, and we're not talking about like, all of our feelings and what hurt us and what we saw on TV and what it brought up in us. Like that's feminine conversation. When you work with somebody, or when you build a village with somebody, right? Or you go to the gym with somebody, or you camp, or you hike, right? You see who that person is, right? You see who that man is. You see, okay, can this guy push himself, right? Is this guy someone that's complaining, or is he someone that's helping other people out? Is this person like a net positive to the endeavor and the challenge that we're going, that we're trying to accomplish together, right? These are things that men are keeping track of. It's like we're trying to build like an army, and we're trying to decide, okay, who's in the army and who's not in the army, right? Who's going to be a good ally for the fight that is life, and who is not. That's how we're judging people. It's not emotional. And I mean, it is, but it's not the same. It's not feminine emotional, right? It's like we're trying to find our battle brothers. We're trying to find our comrades, right? There's like different words for it. But I think that bond is just as important as feminine bonds. But I do think the modern culture really downplays that. And it makes it, they say that, oh, men's friendships are shallow. Men's friendships are, weak. They're fragile. You don't know anything about the man. You don't know anything about the guy next to you. And it's like, yeah, but I know if he can like handle himself in a fight, right? Or I know that I can depend on him if I need help when shit gets real. And for men, like that's the most important thing for us. I'm curious, is that the same in your culture?
It is very, very similar. I don't know if you've read The Way of Men by Jack Donovan, but the first line in the book is the way of men is the way of the gang. And then he goes on to talk about why fire teams in the military are like only 2 to 4 people. Because it's like a 2 to 4 man gang. It's like a hunting party or a raiding party. And so like you're looking for your guys who you can go kill a mammoth with, or like kill a saber-toothed tiger with. And while you're going out and doing that, then you grow in other ways and you form different bonds. And I also think it's interesting that, back in the day we used to have these like rites of passage and rituals that young men or boys would transition into adulthood. And we don't have those anymore. So how does your work kind of address that or help that? Or have you observed any negative kind of consequences of not having those rites of passage?
For sure, yeah. And I'll answer that. I want to flip back on you to see, what Islamic culture has with that, But I will say, listeners, also we interviewed Jack Donovan on the show, so we'll put a link to that in the show notes if you want to check out that interview. It's an amazing interview. Really enjoyed talking to that guy. He was one of my heroes for a long time. Loved that book, and I finally got to interview him, and I'm like, oh my god, this guy is like, he's genius and unbelievably jacked. So just talking to him is like crazy. He's like a very powerful force. As far as the rites of passage, I agree. I think our culture doesn't really have it. Well, actually, I'll take that back. I think American culture actually has 2 that are not talked about enough and not valued enough. The first one, I think, is fatherhood. So I think that's true across all human cultures, right? It's like the moment you have a child, you are an adult, right? Because you have a child, right? You cannot lie to yourself anymore. You cannot stay a boy because you now have someone that is younger than you, that is part of you, that is the child in the room. And, I think our culture does jack shit to prepare men for fatherhood, right? In many ways, and I think it's kind of to the themes we're talking about, I'm a new father. The education that we have through kind of traditional means is like, be supportive to your wife, right? It's still this kind of like secondary helping role. It's not a lot about what it means to be a dad and how to be a good dad. That stuff's out there. Again, we do that at MTO. There's a lot of other great fatherhood organizations. But I think in the general culture, we're not really talking about that. We're just saying like, hey, be supportive to the woman and then she's going to do the raising. But being a dad is a big rite of passage. The other one that I think is certainly in Western culture and certainly in capitalist culture is starting a business or being an entrepreneur. I think that is the current like wilderness, is like you're kind of alone and it's just your wits and your discipline and your skill, and you're trying to make something work and you're trying to get money, extract money from the market. And I think that is a major source of growth for a lot of men, is when they decide to become an entrepreneur or try to launch something. But it's not the stuff that you think of. It's not like, I recently watched 300 because the Odyssey just came out. So I watched 300 again because I love that movie. And like they have this scene of like the little boy fighting a wolf in the snow, right? It's like, we don't have that. We don't really have like a lot of religious or spiritual rituals anymore. And I think it leads to a lot of men feeling that deep down, and I'll use this word, like they're a pussy, frankly, because they've known that they've never done anything hard, right? Because I think life in many ways is too easy for a lot of guys. And if we've never done anything difficult, we don't know that we're strong. And I think it leads to a lot of men feeling like they don't belong. They feel they have imposter syndrome. They feel like they don't deserve nice things in life, right? They feel like they can't go after things because they've never really proven themselves. It's also from the Jack Donovan book. He talks about proving yourself to yourself. And I think that's what the modern initiation looks like, is like picking something for you. And again, a therapist or a coach can help you with this, can help get you there, but picking something that you really think is difficult that feels like a little bit too hard. You know, it's not impossible, but it is hard. And when you do it, you're going to feel accomplished. And for most men, I think that starts off physical, you know, run a marathon or, you know, get into heavy lifting or whatever, build something cool. But, you know, we're talking about modern masculinity. I think it changes where the challenges are also emotional, right? So we talked about like be a good father, right? Or find a life partner that really treats you well, that you treat well. You know, it can also be mental, like launching a business or learning a skill, right? Like I want to be really good at carpentry or woodworking or, you know, guitar. Like it doesn't matter what the flavor is, but something that you think is cool that challenges you, whether that be physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual, and probably many of these throughout your life. So that you know that you still have it, right? Or that you know that you have the ability to do difficult things. So I think men, we need that. Like that's our self-confidence, is knowing that we can like handle our shit and that we can overcome obstacles. So to bring it back to you, I'm curious, like in Muslim culture, are there traditional coming of age? How do they exist in the modern world? Like how does your culture really deal with that? Or does it?
Historically, we used to get married a lot younger. So like getting married would be one of them. And you know, as you were talking and going through the different modern kind of rites of passage, I can sort of map my own growth as a man to getting married, having my first child, starting my business. So like those are the three main things, I guess, in the modern world that would work for us. But now, like in the even in the Muslim world, I'm sure it's the same in the non-Muslim world as well. The concept of adolescence, right? So like you're a teenager, right, for like 10 years, and then you're a college student, right, for another 4 years, or up to like 6 years, 6 to 8 years, depending on whether you do your master's or not. So that's like 10 to up to 18 years where you're not really an adult, or you're not really considered an adult, or you don't consider yourself an adult. And that, I think, has a lot of, to use the word literally, there's a retardation of progress there. So I think that's a problem, because with modernity and with the way the modern world is set up and modern society is set up, in the Muslim world, we don't really have this distinction. You are a boy, and then once you pass the age of puberty, you're a man. That's like even in our Islamic canon, our traditions of like theology and law and stuff like that, we don't really have the distinction of adolescence. Once the boy becomes a man, then he has to do man stuff. And I think they even have it with other faith traditions like Judaism. Judaism has the bar mitzvah, right? And so like he's a man then, and so now he's able, or he's at the age or at the point where now he needs to go out and go to war somewhere. And so I found that the biggest problem is this idea of an extended adolescence. And it's funny the way you were when you were mentioning all of this, and you mentioned, you know, Jack Donovan being a hero of yours. So Jack Donovan has this concept of being good at being a man and being a good man. And he was like the first person I have heard who made this distinction. And when I read it in The Way of Men, it clicked. It explains so much, because everything like we think that is being good at being a man is just being a good man. And so that's why we have all of these arguments and debates about, oh, that's not a real man. A real man would do X, Y, and Z. And then the real man definition changes from time to place to culture to society, etc. And what really we're arguing about is our definition of a good man. And that's where I got the subtitle for my book, is 40 Hadith on Masculinity, How to Be a Good Man. So Jack Donovan's book, The Way of Men, teaches us how to be good at being a man, okay? So the essence of masculinity, the 4 tactical virtues of masculinity. And then my books will teach you how to be a good man if you're a Muslim. And so I'm sure there's like different versions for Christians, for Jews, for Buddhists, etc., and etc.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, so tell me about that, right? Like what is your definition of a good man through the Islamic lens?
So the book is called 40 Hadith on Masculinity because it collects 40 sayings of the Prophet. And so in the Islamic canon, we have a tradition where scholars or authors would collect 40 sayings of the Prophet on a certain topic. So, there could be a 40 Hadith on parenting, or a 40 Hadith on the virtues of wrestling, or various different topics, right? So I decided that there wasn't really one on on gender studies, as it were. So I decided, okay, let me put these together. So that's where the idea or the concept of the book came from. And the reason for the book, or the reason why the book is set up that way, is because in our case as Muslim men and even Muslim women, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is our criteria for how to be a good man and even how to be a good woman. So whatever he says and did and told us to do, that's how we ought to act. And whenever modernity or modern conceptions of masculinity and femininity conflict with what our Prophet taught us, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that's when we have to sort of pause and try to decide or try to act in a way that is reflective of our faith tradition, as opposed to what modernity tells us to do.
Yeah. So is there an example of that, of maybe a conflict or maybe a different spin between like the traditional definitions and the modern way?
You could there's a lot of like debate online that there is a lot of conflict and tension between the two worlds, as it were, but there isn't really. It's, when you really think about it, when you really try to understand the teachings, the idea is you're a man or a woman in the time that you live in, right? And so you have to do the best with with the tools you have available and the world that you live in right now. And so the struggles that we have as men and women of our time will be very different to the struggles that our parents and grandparents face, and very different to the Muslims of the first century faced when Islam first started out. And so there is like an element of dynamism and adaptation to the times. And I know you asked me for a specific example. Here's one tradition from the chapter. The chapter title is "He is Stoic." And one of the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "True patience is at the first stroke of calamity." So it's all well and good to it's a reflection of your character that when bad stuff happens to you, like, what is your immediate reaction? What happened? How do you react at the second you get bad news, or the second bad thing, something bad happens to you? So, I mean, in our tradition, patience, the Arabic word for it is sabr, and the idea is that you have to be able to bear hardship without being upset or anxious. And then forbearance is the act of self-restraint and control when patience is called for. And so you can see here, there's a lot of overlap with Stoicism, right? And so I'm sure every faith tradition and every culture has a lot of these concepts. So what we're doing is we're just instead of letting people or letting Muslims go out and into the world and collect things together piecemeal, we're like collecting all of the traditions that are relevant to them in one place.
I think that's awesome, and it can be like a real primer. And to what we were saying earlier in the episode, right? It's like you're actually providing a roadmap for, boys and young men and adolescents that want to become adults, and being like, hey, this is what it looks like through the modern lens, and it's rooted in our ancient traditions, right? Which is great. It's like these people, and I think, I know there are some differences, but it's like if you study the mind for long enough and you study human nature, you're going to find some of the same conclusions. So you're right. Like Marcus Aurelius was talking about this in ancient Rome of like, hey, just like take a moment, pause, don't freak out, and then act from rationality, right? I mean, that's kind of what I'm hearing in the passage that you read, which is like, just like, don't jump to conclusions. Don't like let your emotions win, like stay steady and like keep your eyes on the target. And that's great. And not only is that great, that is a skill. Like you don't just have that. You have to build that. Because I think especially as a child, right, you're all emotions and you're all impulses and you don't have your prefrontal cortex to really slow yourself down. So you have to build that skill. So not only is it something to do, it's something that you can actually work on. It's very actionable, which I like. You can get better at that if you practice that.
It is. And what I noticed after, putting this book together and publishing it, what I noticed immediately was how I noticed all of my shortcomings and how little I am like the Prophet. And the Muslim ideal is to be as much like the Prophet as we can be, right? And so what I noticed was like, oh man, I kind of suck as a guy. I need to do a lot of work. In trying to help other people, you sort of tend to help yourself as well. I don't know if you've noticed that with your helping men either through your therapy or your coaching. I wonder if you've also notice that you have improved as well.
For sure. I mean, I was real insufferable growing up. I was like, I started off really shy, really shut down. And then I like went the other direction and I was like kind of just like a jackass and like a know-it-all and like just like really annoying to be around, But I think doing this work, it sounds similar to you, like reading the books, talking to a lot of men, trying to become a role model, trying to, embody it because I don't want to be a hypocrite. I don't want to be telling guys, to do things that I'm too afraid to do myself, right? So, I'm getting inspired by some of my other clients' journeys. Like, oh, wow, you did that? Shit, okay. What's my excuse? I guess I better go talk to my wife about that thing, right? Or I better go push myself in this way. I think it is natural. And I think it is a real like blessing and privilege that like I get to anchor my life around this. And I imagine the same for you because it is very personal, right? It is very deep. And like, it's good to have an ideal, right? I mean, I studied Buddhism intensely and we had this idea of enlightenment, right? Maybe similar to the idea of like being like the Prophet, but it's being like the Buddha, right? And like, that's a good goal, but it's not about attaining that goal. It's about working towards it. And I think like the first level is just what you're talking about of like being humble and being like, yeah, I'm not there yet, but here's some things I can actively work on to move myself in the direction that I want to move on. And I think like we talk about men going to therapy, it's like that's where I hope that men can start is with humility. Just being like, and it takes a lot of courage to be like, hey, I'm like not a good dad, really. Or I'm not the dad that I want to be. Maybe it's a little bit softer, right? Or I'm not the best husband that I want to be. Or you know what? I drink too much and I need to change that. Or I know that I'm capable of something more, but I really have a lot of self-hatred and a lot of procrastination. And I need help getting over that. Like, I think that is so courageous to be able to just say that and then take responsibility for it and start actually improving. Because until you like admit that you are not good at something, you're going to be living in this like diluted version of like ego and just denial. And I think a lot of men are stuck there, because I think fear wins more often than not. I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, it's the process, right? The process is more important than the goal. And, I mean, in our context, like as Muslims, we believe that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a perfect human. And so we can't be perfect as like regular people, right? So, and we know we're not going to be perfect, but why do we keep trying? Why do we keep trying to be like the Prophet? It's because of the process. The process, through striving, through struggling, through fighting against our devices that we're inclined to. Like each person has like certain kinds of sins that they tend to fall into more, right? And so in trying to fight against those temptations and fight against those tendencies, everything counts. And even if you try to reach the goal, but you fall short, like we believe at least we'll get rewarded for the trying part. And it is the same, like even in the worldly sense, where you could try to train to hit like, a 405 squat, and then let's say you don't hit it. Okay. You train for 6 months and you do a day where you're going to work up to your 405 squat, which is 4 plates aside, and you don't hit it. But along the way, you hit 350, you hit 385, you hit 395, and you just missed this one little bit. Like you didn't reach your goal, but you did get stronger along the way. You went from 305 to 385, and you still put 85 pounds on your squat. So I think that's the important thing about it.
Exactly. Yeah. And all the stuff you had to learn. You had to learn discipline, right? You had to learn like a technique, right? How to squat properly. You had to learn how to like get up and go to the gym when you didn't want to, right? How to push yourself. You had to learn, maybe you made a friend along the way, right? You met someone at the gym, right? There's like all these other benefits that happen, and the goal becomes less important. I'm curious kind of on that topic of trying. I wonder if this is a phenomenon that's happening in the Muslim world too, but I see in America, at least, the younger generation, right, Gen Z and part of Gen Alpha, they feel so intimidated that they're kind of already giving up, and they're only like 16 years old, and I think a lot of them talk about social media as an example, where they show these influencers, right? They see the guy that's squatting 405 and that's, their age, right? They see the guy that's already rich and is like an influencer and is dating all these people and traveling the world. And they're like, if I'm not this, what's the even point of trying? And I see that a lot with the younger generation, where they're just so intimidated, because the bar has been set like way too high around these people that are like, I mean, you never know what happens in the background of these influencers, like how real they even are, right? They have teams behind them, right? Like, it's not just this person building themselves by their bootstraps, like they're an entertainer and they're selling you, like a story. But I am curious if that's true in the Muslim world, because I'm seeing a lot of people that are like, that they've already resigned themselves. They're like, I'm going to be poor. I'm not going to be successful. I'm never going to get in shape. Like they're giving up, and they're only like 20 years old, right? Their life hasn't even really started in many ways.
Yeah. So you're talking about blackpilling, right? So it depends on how close to their faith the individual is. The more religious they are, the less likely they are to blackpill. However, having said that, I'm sure like our, young Muslim men and young Muslim women are not immune to social media brainwashing. And so either they will give up, they'll blackpill the way you say, or they will look for shortcuts. So they will, like, if they want to make money, they'll scam people. They'll steal from people. If they want to Looksmax or improve their physique, they'll start taking steroids. And there are there's literally influencers that teach this. Clavicular is one example. Clavicular is one example of a streamer where he's young, but like he's been on steroids and other kinds of performance enhancing drugs. And so now he's like totally nuked his own natural kind of hormone function in order to achieve this one particular goal through Looksmaxing. And I don't know if your audience may be familiar with this, or if you're familiar with this, but Clavicular was recently in court. Okay. And so he went viral, or his judge in the court went viral for mogging Clavicular. Okay. And so what I noticed was that the judge was a grown man, and the judge had grown man looks. And also he had the authority and gravitas of his position. And so the reason why the judge mogged Clavicular is because the judge was a grown man, and Clavicular went for the shortcut. And so all of the looks, the attractiveness, the status, the station of a grown man that comes with age cannot be shortcutted away through injecting some kind of compounds inside of your body. You have to look like this in order to have grown man looks, right? And you have to like go through life. You have to have life experiences. You have to fail. You have to have your heart broken. Like you have to get your shit kicked in at some point. Like you need to get beaten up, like knocked out. So like all of that plays into the attractiveness of a man.
And I think that's really well said. It's like, I mean, Jack Donovan again, right? Like it's the gravitas that he talks about. It's the idea of like having all these experiences. That's what women are attracted to, right? They're attracted to, and a mature woman, a woman that you want to really, get married to and bring into your life and have be a closest person, is going to see a whole holistic view. They're not just looking at your looks. I mean, that's important. Again, like be in shape, be healthy, but it's more about like what you bring and your vibe and your aura, right? To use kind of the Gen Z word, right? Like it's more about how much aura you can cultivate and less about like what you look like. and I think, a mature woman will sniff out shortcuts, because what you're displaying is like that you're just kind of lazy, right? Or that you're cowardly, right? Like they're looking one layer below some of that. Well, Nabeel, we're moving towards the end of our show here, and this has been great. I think we could keep talking. But I'm curious, as we're wrapping up, like, what's next for you? I mean, you got this blog, you got the newsletter, and listeners, we're going to have a link to all those in the description if you want to sign up, if you want to subscribe. You know, you're publishing these 2 books. What's next on the horizon? What's your next project and what's your next ambition?
Yeah, so the idea that I had for Muslim Man, and I'm also going to sort of launch Muslim Woman as well, is for it to be like a media company or a lifestyle brand. And I want it to be like a TV station. I want the YouTube channel to have shows and to have like stars and talent. I don't want to be like the face of it, like, cause me, like, as one guy, like, how much can I do? I mean, I can do a lot, right? But I'm not perfect. I have my own shortcomings, and then I don't want the idea of Muslim man or Muslim woman to be tied to the presence of one person. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to build out like a stable of talent, and then come up with ideas for shows, and sort of turn it into like its own TV station, almost. But that's really what I'm trying to do. And then along the way, I'll figure out some way to monetize it.
That's awesome. I think having more voices and creating more of a movement is great. I'm going to go ahead and subscribe to your channel so I can watch it grow and see where it goes, because I think that's critical. I think like getting more voices, younger voices, different voices is like great, so people can see themselves in whoever you have that's speaking. This has been phenomenal. If people want to find you online, if they want to buy the book, where should they look?
Yeah, if you can just go to muslimman.com, and then there'll be links to get the books there. You can like go to any place where you buy your books online, and you'll find them.
Great. Yeah, and listeners, again, we're going to have links to those in the description. So thank you so much for tuning in. Nabeel, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Mark. It was a pleasure.
And listeners, thanks for listening, tuning in. As you know, Men's Therapy Podcast is part of Men's Therapy Online. So all of our stuff is at menstherapy.online. If you look there, you're going to find way too many podcast episodes you can listen to, so many blogs. We just recently redid our content library so you can sort and filter it, because before it was just a giant pile of stuff. But now, depending on what you want to listen to, if you want to listen to stuff about spirituality, if you want to listen to stuff about divorce, about nice guy syndrome, about addiction, all that is nice and sorted there for you. And you can search on our page as well to find the content that relates to you. And if you want to work with us, we offer individual coaching, couples coaching, and men's groups. What we do have available for everybody is we have a free community online via Slack that you can join. You can message me on there. I'm active. Tim, who we talked about in this show, he's active on that. Nabeel will get an invite after he's done with this. So it's a place to come and talk with other people that are doing the work and find those that fire team, those brothers that are all trying to just become better versions of themselves. So check all that stuff out. That is at menstherapy.online. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week on the episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast.